Nobody can speak without expressing some form of solidarity with the people of Gaza who at the moment are undertaking a struggle for their lives. As the children are murdered and the bombs are flying from Israel, I think it's absolutely critical now that we use every platform we can to expose what's going on, which is effectively an attempt at genocide against the Palestinians. That's why I'm here in solidarity. As you said, the conference was convened today to stand back and discuss, assess where we're at and what our campaign should look like in the coming period of struggle that we're at. Let me be brief. I think the terms of the struggle that we're facing change in about 3 weeks' time. At the moment, the economy, they're describing it as a corrugated display of rippling along the bottom of economic activity, occasionally a peak of increase in activity and then a decline. It's that corrugated road to nowhere. And in 3 weeks' time, the Chancellor Exchequer Osborne will get up on the supposedly autumn, but it's a winter pre-budget statement, and I think he'll fulfil the promise that he made 6 months ago. I think he'll come for another £10 billion worth of cuts within the welfare benefit system. And I say that because, first of all, apart from this corrugated profile of economic activity, it looks as though in the new year most of the predictions are that we've come out of a double-dip recession, we're now going into a triple-dip recession. And there will be elements of panic amongst the Tories and the coalition overall to look at where they can find a vast array of cuts. So £10 billion at least. But I don't think what's happening now is in any way a panic reaction by them. I think it's a long concerted plan. Way back in May '97, just before the general election which brought New Labour to power, there was a pamphlet published by the Social Market Foundation, the right-wing think tank that the Tories have been using over the years, and others. And it was by Robert Skidelsky. And it was called Beyond the Welfare State, Beyond Welfare. And it set out what effectively would have been the blueprint for the Tories if they'd got elected in '97, and has certainly become the blueprint for their attack on welfare over the last 2 years. And what Skidelsky argued was that welfare itself was not just inefficient, it was immoral. It actually promoted idleness amongst the working class. What a wanker. What he put forward was a three-tier system for the future. First of all, a lower tier of benefit at the very lowest basic level, administered locally, that would have to be supplemented by local charities. Then a second tier which was based upon insurance, but insurance within the private sector where people purchased protections against unemployment and sickness, etc., and pension. And then a higher tier for those who could afford it of additional benefits. And it was premised all on the basis of workfare, and workfare rigorously and ruthlessly implemented. 2.5 years on into this government, that's virtually what the edifice they've put in place. We now have at the local level now, people, well, you've heard it today, and we've just heard from Jane, the numbers that are actually in poverty, but having to supplement their income as a result of, well, to be frank, charity, the food banks. In my constituency, we give out food now. I was in a supermarket collecting a few weeks ago, and what surprised me, it was one of those days where you ask people just to put a tin in a box that will go to our food bank and we can distribute. What surprised me was not the numbers giving. I was always impressed by the solidarity of working class people. What surprised me was the numbers asking, where can I get the food? That's happening at the local level. The biggest increase in child poverty now that we've seen in maybe 3 decades. In terms of the other elements of insurance, well, people can't afford insurance, so what they do is they borrow. So the payday loans and the debts. And if anything symbolises this era, it's the rise of the bailiff and the brutality of the bailiff system. The CAB now is saying that they're dealing with, on average, about 24,000 cases of complaints against aggressive and physically violent bailiffs a year. The number of court orders is expected to rise from 2 million a year to 4 million a year within this next 12 months for debt by working class people. The system is almost in place. In terms of workfare, well, you know, we now have the creation of a reserve army of unemployed who are actually forced onto unpaid work. Now, in every other century, there's been a word for that. It's slavery. It's slavery. And the combination of cuts of welfare benefits, the cap on housing benefits, the cap on benefits overall, the ATOS assessment of forcing people with disabilities off their benefits and onto, well, in many instances, no benefits. The sanctions used against people who've refused workfare or have just failed to fill in the form properly or turn up on time have increased from just over 100,000 in 2 years to over 500,000 sanctions, where people have lost all benefits from either 2 weeks up to 6 months. And now they're threatening to move that sanction to beyond that. That's the society within 2.5 years they've created on the basis of Skidelsky's arguments of 97. And in 3 weeks' time, when that budget statement is made, they'll want to put the final parts of that edifice in place with another round of cuts. And by the way, the other thing that was in that booklet that's worth reading was the other element was to tackle the big expenditure within the welfare state by privatisation, and that was health and education. And again, we're seeing right the way across the country now the closures, the £20 billion worth of cuts in health, the privatisations, the tendering for services deep within the heart of hospitals themselves. And then, of course, the privatisation of education with the free schools, the academies, etc. Skidelsky's plan is virtually in place now. And this last period now is when I think there'll be the biggest onslaught on the welfare state that was created after the Second World War. And what's interesting is the revelations about how people are living. HSBC, a bank, published a survey only 2 weeks ago about how precarious life was for the vast majority of people in this country. A third of people have less than £250 in the bank. And even HSBC said basically that's people on the edge of destitution. That's the scale that we're now facing as a result of what this government has done over the last 2.5 years. So this battle now, in 3 weeks' time, when the budget statement is announced, our struggle changes, I think, dramatically. Because this is for life or death of the welfare state, full stop, and for many people, it's for life or death itself, its existence. And therefore we need to steel ourselves now for this coming period. This is the period when I think we're all going to be tested. Because this is it. This is the line in the sand that we've got to stop them transgressing. And that does mean absolute determination now in every way. Every form of resistance that we can mobilise, we need to mobilise. And I think I pay tribute to what's happened right the way across the campaigns. DPAC and Black Triangle have mobilised the resistance movement amongst people with disabilities on a scale we've not seen before for a couple of decades. And I congratulate them. It takes courage, you know, to chain yourself wheelchair to wheelchair to block Oxford Street and Trafalgar Square and then into the DWP itself, and I congratulate you. Yes, I congratulate UK Uncut and all those occupations to expose what's happened in terms of tax justice and the failure to pay the tax by some of these massive firms. But in addition, all those others in struggle, the Right to Work campaign and boycott welfare, who've exposed workfare itself, who've picketed outside the companies that are exploiting people. And yes, the Right to Protest campaign, that has stood by people who've been dragged through the courts and made examples of them, and stood by their families even when they've been forced into detention or prison. I think people are up for this struggle. I actually do. And last week, when the rest of Europe was out striking on the streets, what angered me was the response in this country. To be frank, when others were on strike in Germany and France and Spain, the massive demonstrations, the TUC's contribution was to send out a press release. That was it. We became the scabs of Europe because we failed to rise to that challenge. We can't let that happen again. So the task now is for every union that seeks to take industrial action, automatic support. Automatic support. And yes, the work that we do through the Trade Union Coordinating Group and elsewhere to coordinate that action is absolutely critically important now. But if individual unions have to come out on their own, so be it. If it is up to PCS to take the lead, or RMT or any other, so be it. Because I think one union taking strike action gives confidence to others and gives confidence for individual trade unions to challenge the bureaucrats who are holding them back. That's why it's important to support them. So in this coming period, it is about planning. It is about planning that coordinated industrial action as best we can. But I think we also need now to consider how we coordinate our forms of direct action, so that when one individual group takes direct action of whatever sort, what level, we're immediately supporting them. And that we coordinate the direct action campaigns next year on a synchronised basis. I want to be in a situation where no Tory MP, no coalition minister can travel anywhere in the country or show their face anywhere in public without being challenged by direct action. They need to be held to account for every action they're doing and the suffering they're causing working class people in this country. My view is they're social criminals. And eventually, I warned them, we will try you for what you've done. We will try you for what you've done to our community. We will hold you responsible for every harm, every hurt you've made against every individual in this country. Let me just say this final thing. The most important thing now is, I think, gear ourselves up, recognise the ferocity of the struggle that's to come, to recognise that we have to be determined, that we have to be courageous, and whether it's an individual or a group or a union or a mass gathering, it's important that we do it in solidarity. Now, I think there's a need for a frank discussion amongst all of us now about saying, how do we come together better? How do we coordinate our actions better? How do we put aside any sectarian differences? How do we ensure that we're most effective? And we're most effective, we've learned the lessons over 2 centuries. We're most effective when we're united, when we mobilise as a class. So in this coming period, all of us now has an individual responsibility about how we participate and organise and strengthen those actions, but we also have a responsibility to ensure that we're doing that in solidarity with others and in a coordinated way. There's too many groups, too many organisations now at the moment organising individually. One of the things that I'm suggesting is we ask individual trade union leaders and others to bring everyone together to talk about a planned, coordinated campaign over the next 12 months with a very specific objective to bring this government down. We have to have a way in which we mobilise that is effective. So I'll say this just finally, really. It takes 3 things: determination, courage, and sometimes it takes courage to be that individual who raises the issue within your workplace, within your education, in your school, or in the trade union branch, wherever it is. Certainly doesn't take it in Parliament, I tell you. But anyway, it takes an element of courage. But the most important thing now is solidarity, that we work together and recognise this is class warfare. They are waging a war against our class, and it's a war that we cannot afford to lose. And actually, we have the strength to win. Solidarity.